Kaizen Asiedu discusses the complexity of political and racial labels, emphasizing that people often feel boxed into categories like black conservative without having the opportunity to define themselves. He highlights the tendency of society to assign fixed identities based on external traits, notably skin color and political affiliation, which oversimplifies the diversity within individuals. Kaizen reflects on his own experience of initially resisting these labels, but eventually accepting that others will interpret him through certain filters, while urging listeners to focus on the nuance behind any identity. The conversation points to the limitations of tribal thinking and binary classifications in politics and race. Kaizen notes that people often expect conformity to perceived group norms, which stifles critical thinking and contributes to tribalism. He encourages an individualistic approach where people consider ideas based on their merit, not tribal identity, fostering a growing wave of divergent thinking made possible by decentralized platforms and direct communication via social media and AI. Tribalism is addressed as a natural human phenomenon that historically served to protect and organize communities based on allegiance. Kaizen explains its evolutionary utility, from prioritizing family to expanding outward to wider social groups like nations or global humanity. However, he warns about over-attachment to tribal identity, which fosters division, dehumanization of outsiders, and conflict, citing examples like ethnic cleansing and geopolitical wars. The problem lies in the replacement of truth with tribal allegiance, where winning and dominating the opposing tribe eclipses objective reasoning. Kaizen advocates for recognizing tribes as preferences, like choosing communities where people think alike, without letting tribal identity become a rigid, exclusionary framework. He draws on a layered conception of identity that begins with the self and extends through family, tribe, humanity, nature, and even cosmic connection, suggesting that true unity integrates these levels in harmony. The podcast delves into the erosion of free speech culture, especially on college campuses. Kaizen highlights disturbing statistics such as 1 in 3 students, liberal and conservative alike, endorsing physical violence to stop speakers they disagree with. He critiques the conflation of words with physical violence, warning that words should be countered with speech, not force, to preserve civil discourse and democracy. He stresses the importance of maintaining a bright line between hateful speech and physical harm, emphasizing that the power to suppress speech by violence inevitably leads to tyranny. The conversation underscores free speech not just as a legal right, but as a cultural spirit that must be protected by tolerance and charitable engagement with opposing views, fostering a marketplace of ideas where disagreement is a path to truth, not violence. A central critique directed at the Trump administration concerns the tone and manner of immigration enforcement. Kaizen supports the necessity of upholding laws and borders, agreeing on principled grounds for deportation of illegal immigrants. However, he condemns the aggressive and sometimes celebratory tone used in deportation raids, calling for a more humane, quieter, and compassionate approach. He proposes policy solutions such as penalizing employers who hire undocumented workers and creating legal pathways like seasonal visas to reduce illegal immigration. Kaizen argues these practical reforms could undercut incentives for illegal entry while honoring American immigration principles. He stresses the political complexity and the need for nuanced solutions beyond inflammatory rhetoric and simplistic open borders or closed borders stances. Evaluating Trump's foreign policy, Kaizen credits him with success in mediating Middle East conflicts, notably the temporary ceasefire in Gaza and addressing Iranian nuclear threats. Conversely, he expresses disappointment in the unresolved Russia-Ukraine war, noting the difficulty of negotiation with entrenched global powers. Kaizen perceives Trump's style as one that uses leverage and assertiveness, which sometimes clashes with equally strong international actors like Putin. On balance, Kaizen argues that while results are mixed and complex, Trump's efforts arguably prevented worse outcomes in volatile regions. He also warns that alternative democratic policies might have led to prolonged conflict through continued military aid without diplomatic solutions. The importance of strong leadership and boldness in geopolitics is underscored, while acknowledging that foreign affairs demand patience and difficult trade-offs. Turning to economics, Kaizen expresses cautious optimism about Trump's protectionist policies, especially tariffs designed to prioritize American industry over globalist interests. He recognizes that structural economic changes take time and the positive results of such policies may yet unfold, drawing parallels with the Reagan-era recovery. Emphasizing the cultural dimension, he notes that many Americans feel left behind due to lost manufacturing jobs and rising costs of living. While tariffs invite criticism, Kaizen views them as a way to rebalance long-standing trade asymmetries, where other nations impose high tariffs while the U.S. remains more open. He appreciates Trump's focus on the American worker rather than global corporate profitability, aligning economic policy with national interest and cultural renewal rather than purely market-driven internationalism. Kaizen critically examines diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) policies, recognizing their intent to address historic injustices, but warning about their implementation leading to present-day discrimination. He argues that justifying current discriminatory practices solely based on past harms perpetuates resentment and division. Instead of racial preferences, he advocates for meritocracy, combined with addressing systemic geographic and socioeconomic disparities, irrespective of race. He notes America's progress in reducing active racial oppression and warns against allowing race to become the dominant lens for identity and interpersonal interaction. For Kaizen, color should be deprioritized, akin to merely a preference similar to favorite ice cream flavor, while focusing on unity around shared principles like those in the Constitution. He stresses remembering past injustices but resisting perpetual victim identity politics. The conversation tackles the complex and contentious topic of gender ideology and transgender youth. Kaizen acknowledges the confusion adolescence brings, exacerbated by social media and cultural pressure, noting how children often internalize messages that masculinity is toxic or that they may be born in the wrong body. While compassionate towards individuals experiencing gender dysphoria, he critiques affirming irreversible medical interventions on minors. Kaizen presents both sides of the debate with charity, those who see gender as a social construct allowing fluid identities versus concerns about safeguarding youth and preserving objective biological realities. He advocates for loving and empowering individuals as they are, rather than fostering identity-based victimhood or pushing ideology that fragments social coherence. His position promotes respect for biological sex while recognizing personal uniqueness beyond rigid gender boxes. The dialogue highlights the dual-edged impact of social media and algorithmic echo chambers on public discourse. Kaizen reflects on how major news outlets once shaped political narratives, but now individuals can communicate directly, broadening exposure to diverse viewpoints. However, social media also accelerates tribalism, hive thinking, and polarization by reinforcing ideological bubbles and misrepresenting opponents' views. This environment hampers meaningful conversation, breeds intolerance, and encourages the weaponization of identity politics. Kaizen promotes digital literacy tools and platforms like Ground News that aggregate multiple political perspectives to help users escape bias. He encourages users to steelman opposing arguments and cultivate humility, intellectual honesty, and curiosity to counteract misinformation and partisanship. Kaizen dives deeply into the Epstein saga, clarifying the distinction between the alleged Epstein client list and the broader Epstein files. He recounts the political and social expectations around the release of these documents during the Trump administration. Despite initial promises, the files released fell short of the dramatic revelations many anticipated, leading to distrust and conspiracy theories fueled by incomplete information and partisan narratives. He critiques both Trump's handling, seen as dismissive and politically tone-deaf, and the opportunistic use of Epstein files as a weapon by opponents. Kaizen urges objective assessment and patience, recognizing the limitations of evidence and legal standards while affirming the need for transparency to restore public trust. His balanced appraisal stresses the importance of evidence over conspiracy while acknowledging the cultural thirst for accountability. Kaizen expresses disappointment in Trump's environmental priorities, suggesting a lack of spiritual connection to the earth compared to other political figures. He separates the scientific reality of climate change from fear-driven narratives that feed political control, emphasizing a need for pragmatic solutions like expanding nuclear and solar energy sources. He appreciates Trump's focus on energy affordability and skepticism of international asymmetrical climate agreements that disadvantage the U.S. competitively. The discussion stresses balancing environmental stewardship with economic and geopolitical realities, advocating technology and innovation over regulations that restrict growth or individual freedoms. Kaizen integrates his plant medicine-informed worldview of Gaia as a living entity deserving care, while calling for shared responsibility and nuanced policies that support sustainable progress without coercive control. Throughout the podcast, Kaizen underscores the importance of rigorous and humble intellectual inquiry as a foundation for political and social discourse. Drawing from his background in philosophy and logic, he emphasizes that truth is objective and exists independent of individual experience. The misuse of terms like "my truth" hinders the search for common understanding and fuels polarization. He advocates for teaching critical thinking, logic, and epistemology in education rather than rote memorization. Kaizen highlights methods like show your math, which means laying out premised arguments transparently and being open to revision through reasoned debate. Ultimately, he champions curiosity, patience, and intellectual honesty as virtues essential for personal growth and collective progress, encouraging people to be excited about being corrected and learning together.